Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Zachary Goldman. I am a partner here in the financial services practice at WilmerHale and the co-chair of our digital assets working group. It's a real honor to be with you here, Representative Hill, Chairman Hill, along with our partners in the Atlantic Council's geoeconomics program who do really such terrific work in this space. We are at the moment truly at an inflection point in the regulation of digital assets, due in significant measure to the work of Chairman Hill and his colleagues over the last couple of years. We appear to be poised to adopt stablecoin legislation that will provide the regulatory clarity that companies operating in this space want and need. And that legislation will also cement the United States as the home of the next generation of digital financial infrastructure in the way we have served as and remain the home of the financial infrastructure, global financial infrastructure to this point. And so too with the market structure bill, which aims to define a clear regulatory pathway for digital asset companies and to clearly define the jurisdiction of the SEC and CFTC. These bills are critical to cementing America's role in the financial innovations of tomorrow, and we're looking forward to hearing the chairman's thoughts on these matters today. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to be with us. Josh, over to you.
Well, thank you, Zach. And I want to thank you and Eric and Jeff and Tiffany and all of the colleagues at WilmerHale who have been such fantastic partners. And thank you for hosting us today. Mr. Chairman, good to see you again.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be with you. Thanks.
So the last time we talked about these issues was 2 years ago, summer of 2023. We had you over at the Atlantic Council. You were vice chair then, House Financial Services Committee. And a lot's changed, but a lot's stayed the same. I'm thinking of total volume of stable coins globally, up 60%, crypto market cap globally, over 3 trillion now. And we're going to get into stable coins, and that's going to be the focus of our chat today. But I wanted to hear from you just at the outset, more broadly, the digital asset ambition and agenda that you see for this Congress.
Right. Well, thanks first to WilmerHale and Atlantic Council for coming together to talk about this important topic today. And I thought Zach laid out quite ably the inflection point. We're at a true inflection point where we've seen over the last decade people experimenting with blockchain and decentralized finance and tokenized payments from the standpoint of a coding and innovation point of view. And we've seen some successes and we've seen failures there, just like we do in any emerging market and any emerging technology. But after that decade, I think it's clear that the U.S. needs to establish the rules of the road and a real framework to give clarity to innovation in this space and to give clarity to both investors, entrepreneurs, people who want to write applications, people who want to experiment in decentralized finance, and consumers, what's good and what's bad, what's real and what's not real, what are the rules, what are the expectations about how to innovate. And so over the past 5 years, this has been a priority for the House Financial Services Committee, both under Maxine Waters' leadership when she was the chair. We had the FinTech task forces and AI task forces, and certainly under the dynamic leadership of Patrick McHenry, who both on privacy, on market structure, and on stablecoins led the way by actually drafting and promoting legislation and getting, bipartisan votes. So the House is really in a position, I think, to deliver on President Trump's promises of finding a landing spot for both stable coins and market structure that creates that innovative landscape for the U.S., as Zach pointed out, to lead the world in this aspect of fintech as the world's largest capital markets economy.
So let's dig into stable coins. Can you tell us the latest on the Stable Act, where it stands, timeline? And I think we're all looking on the Senate side of the Genius Act, looking for movement soon, and where you see the biggest differences between the two pieces of legislation.
Well, first of all, this is for those of you that follow Washington for years and cover financial policy or the actions of Congress for a long time. Just seeing the Senate legislate in this space in banking is very important, and I want to do a real hat tip to Tim Scott, who's a busy guy in the Congress and a busy guy in the Senate, for stepping up and leading as the new chairman of the committee in housing, in capital markets, in digital assets, in financial institutions reform, in regulatory tailoring. I got to start there because the last, I'd say 3 Congresses, we didn't have any traction in this space in the Senate. So it's really important to say, let's say, give credit where credit is due and say thanks to the leadership in the Senate for moving legislation in this space. And you referenced the Genius Act, sponsored by my good friend from college days, Bill Haggerty, and a whole cadre of leaders who've been such pioneers in this area in the Senate, but pioneering without a lot of support. Kirsten Gillibrand, Cynthia Lummis have done great work here, and along with Scott and Haggerty, they've got Genius up and potentially scheduled for a floor vote. And the bills are substantially similar. And for those of you who know the House process, we passed the Stable Act in a markup. So we have a bipartisan stablecoin bill in the House through committee, marked up with bipartisan votes. And the Senate is poised to have their stablecoin bill go to the floor. That's kind of the lay of the land. The bills are substantially similar. There are some differences that are not insurmountable, but do need to be rectified and clarified before we actually have a law passed by both houses. One is an extraterritoriality. This is how do people who operate a stable coin, a dollar-backed stable coin, offer that or trade it inside the U.S. So to get the benefits of being in the United States, you need to be what? Like doing business in the United States, being regulated in the United States. And this is not uncommon for 250 years since we're celebrating our semi-sesquicentennial, or however one pronounces the incredible A250 word. You are having a reciprocity issue there that I think is important. We have that in securities. We have that in banking. If you're an international bank, you want to come into the United States, you meet certain requirements to do that. If you're an international bank and you want to lend in the U.S., you have certain, reciprocity type modest oversight. Well, the same should be true in digital. So we're not creating a new regime. So you can either be registered in the U.S. and be a U.S. company under the stablecoin law and you are fully compliant, or you are in a jurisdiction recognized by the U.S. to have a substantially similar regime and enforcement. And I always, as a longtime financial person, use the word enforcement because if you travel the world in foreign affairs, there are plenty of countries that say they have freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, etc. They have a vigorous constitution, but is it enforced in their country? Do they have the rule of law in their country? So they need a common, substantially similar regime that we recognize in the U.S. and we certify in the U.S. And then they have to have good enforcement. So that's an area where the two bills have to come together.
House bill stricter on that than the Senate bill.
It is, and that's, I think, the right way to go. But we don't have a final Senate product yet, and the senators are all talking among themselves about how to where they want to land. So I'm not going to comment about whether their bill could be better or not, because we actually don't know the final text of their bill. All we know is how they went through their initial process to generate enough votes for cloture, but they're working on those final amendments. But that's one topic. Extraterritoriality is an issue. And then we have, I think, a cleaner state federal pathway than the Senate bill. We're OCC for non-banks, banks for bank supervisors for banks, and we preserve a state pathway, but you can have a federal charter. There's not an intermediate step as there is in the Senate bill. So I think I'll stop there on the two. That's not the only issues, but the thing for the audience to take away is that Bill Haggerty, Tim Scott, Lummis, Gillibrand done a fine job on this bill. It's substantially similar with the themes that are in the House bill. The House and Senate staff have worked mightily on that point. The differences are narrow and they can be bridged to have a successful, stablecoin legislation.
One more difference I'll highlight, and then I want to go global for a few minutes. But on yield-bearing stablecoins, this issue has come up. House version also stricter than Senate version.
Yeah. Well, we are in the emerging development of a new payment rail. So we can pay each other in cash. We could pay each other through a check. We can pay each other through an ACH transfer or a wire transfer. You can Venmo me, but that's actually an ACH transaction. It's not really digital. You can use a debit card. You can use a credit card. We have a lot of payment mechanisms. So in a Web3 environment on a blockchain, the idea of doing a tokenized payment, which is the whole concept behind a dollar-backed payment stablecoin, to be used commercially or between individuals or between B2B or B2C, it's a new payment rail. We don't know precisely, how that payment rail will develop. And so I'm going to debit cash, credit my stable coin I have to go make a payment in a blockchain environment. Just like I debit cash today and pay my credit card bill. It's a payment rail. It's not meant to be a place where you're doing anything. Like it's not a money market account. So the idea in both the House and Senate bills is that a dollar-backed payment stable coin is not a yield-bearing activity. And there's differences of opinion on that, but that's, I think, a reasonably bicameral, bipartisan opinion. So, and how that, the wording is pretty clear in the House bill, but there are some nuances around that topic that I think need to be worked out between the two chambers. But, again, that's something I think we could do.
So fair to say you seem optimistic about reconciling the bills and timeline for something final on the president's desk?
Look, 10 years ago, I gave up my private sector career to come into public office in the Congress. So by definition, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist. And all my experiences in government have told me that when people of goodwill with good motives get together in both parties and in both houses and between the executive branch and the legislative branch, you can get things done here. But it takes persistence. This is not an overnight activity. Like all entrepreneurial stories, the average overnight success takes 10 years. A lot of that's true in legislation as well, where you build consensus, you find landing spots for the two political parties, you find landing spots between the legal community versus a policy business-oriented community. And because of the 5 years and good work like Nick Rockwell and Allison Bahuniak and our whole team in the House and Senate, we've developed that point of consensus. The changing point in 2025, as we sit here compared to 2023, is we also have technical assistance, advice, and counsel from the executive branch that's lean yes to trying to do this right. And we really didn't fully have that in the Biden administration. I'll be on record and say, I want to thank the Treasury and the CFTC and to some degree the Fed under Biden's presidency for working constructively to try to get to yes on these topics. And you saw that in 2023 when we were last together, 71 Democrats voted with us on FIT 21, which was our market structure bill then, the new and improved version we introduced last Thursday called the Clarity Act. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I just think we're now at that key point, and that's what makes me optimistic.
All right. Thank you for that note of optimism. For folks who have questions, either here or watching online, use askac.org. I'll get to as many as I can, but I want to step back and look at the international picture, Mr. Chairman. So in February, I interviewed Governor Waller about the same set of topics, and he made a point that we've heard now many times repeated when we've met with central banks and finance ministries since, which is that the stablecoin policy that you're outlining here can be a form of entrenching dollar dominance. I wonder your views on that and the implications you think it has for the role of the dollar going forward.
Right. Well, again, for those of you that study digitization outside the U.S., tokenization outside the U.S., and payment infrastructure outside the U.S., it's been such an amazing few decades, and particularly in the last decade. I started my career in payments as a big part of my early career in banking, so it's an area I've always followed. And you're seeing, particularly in countries that have weak rule of law, dubious budgetary considerations, not terrific records in their currency or the stability of their currency in terms of price stability. In other words, countries that are faced with budget instability and high inflation routinely. You've seen dollar-backed stablecoins become a real standard, not for remittances per se, and not for necessary B2B transactions, but I mean, on the street, buying cigarettes, going to the store with a dollar-backed stablecoin. So I agree with the premise that if now under US law, we have a high quality, highly regulated, highly audited, highly defined dollar-backed stablecoin, which becomes the premier definition in the world for one, then those issuers of dollar-backed stablecoins outside the United States, in my view, will rise to the occasion of trying to hit that quality point. Otherwise, wouldn't you want to use the one that had the best safety, best auditing, best standard? Certainly B2B would, no doubt. And you'll get into in an emerging economy where you already have deep penetration by one of the others that, they might not change because they have, they've done product adoption and it works for them. At the margin, that's the first thing I always hear on this subject about, enhancing the dollar as the reserve currency through a dollar-backed stablecoin outside the US. I agree with that premise. The other thing I hear is, well, you're creating a big demand for treasury securities to back a dollar-backed stablecoin. But while that's true, it's for bills. So it's a 90-day T-bill or shorter or overnight repo type collateral support for the dollar for dollar backing for a true dollar-backed stablecoin. So yes, there's demand for short-term treasuries in that, no doubt, but it is not in any way benefiting the U.S. in terms of the total treasury yield curve planning, if you get my point. So I think the more important point to take away is the first point, which you started with, which is that this will be a way to anchor the dollar in a transactional reserve currency way around the world in a way we haven't seen before, which is at retail versus petrodollars of 1973.
Yeah, and it can accelerate. Dollarization is an old concept, but now we have a version of digital dollarization you're talking about. That can
right. And driven by the private sector. The whole secret behind a dollar-backed stablecoin is that we let the private sector in this country innovate. Well, this is not some top-down push from the central planning zone in Beijing of a central bank digital currency thing that we tie to Huawei and we tie to our financing in your country. This is a grassroots acceptance that this technology, combined with it being a dollar-backed technology, is embraced by really hundreds of millions of people across the emerging economies. No one's told them to do it. Nobody's made them do it. It works for them. And it's a way to extend, I think, that dollar brand.
I'll pull up a chart now that proves your point in terms of stablecoin flows around the world. And for those who don't know, 98% of all stablecoins are pegged to the dollar. So when we look at this research, what this shows here from the Atlantic Council is that 80% of stablecoins, dollar-backed stablecoins, the flow is around the world. This is from September, but I don't think it's changed significantly since. And so the question, I think, is, it makes sense what you're saying in emerging markets, there's the demand. But I was really struck in April, Italy's finance minister, Giorgetti, said he was more concerned about the dollar-backed stablecoin than tariffs from a financial stability purview in Europe. And their perspective was a sovereignty issue. And it's not an emerging market. We're talking about Italy here. We're talking about the Eurozone. And so I wonder if you worry at all about these sort of, backlash to the dollar-backed stablecoins. They're pursuing
this would be
digital euro.
Well, I mean, this gets into, let me go back to this basic premise instead of making everything about, economic statecraft. The traveler's check was a 19th and 20th century innovation that went around the country, world, and you could denominate it in pounds or marks or dollars, but American Express made it famous, obviously. And over the years, there are plenty of competitors in the credit card industry, but, two American brands tend to dominate in that space in payment rails. Hey, when I'm in Germany, I'll pay in euros. I might get a better rate, or I might not. I don't know that this is automatically like disenfranchising somebody who runs the wine store in Turin, that somebody might come in and pay with a dollar-backed stable coin versus a euro-backed stable coin. I hear you, but I mean, I think they probably could have said that in 1965 about Bank AmeriCard and American Express traveler's checks. Oh my God, what are all our storekeepers going to do with those? They're going to like spend them is what they're going to do with them.
That's fair. Fair enough. I'll put up one more chart here. This just goes to the point about the different regulatory environment. And what we show here is MiCA versus what Japan's doing. And now, of course, in the stablecoin framework. And I think really what you were saying at the beginning, Mr. Chairman, about the standard setting function that the stablecoin legislation can have. And I'm curious just how you see this influence regulatory environments for stablecoins around the world.
Well, I think America's been in a listening mode for the last decade. I mean, we've had members, Chairman McHenry and others have visited routinely. I've had many, many meetings over the last 5 to 6 years with the supervisory officials in Singapore and in the United Kingdom and the European Union and in Japan, about how are they looking at this? How are they thinking about a market framework for digital assets? And so we've learned a lot, from them. And we've had members travel and visit with those jurisdictions as well. And our basis for our market structure bill and for our stablecoin bill, in my view, reflects that. And that's why I think that if we have the right rules of the road inside our own country that we're used to, that'll set a high standard for other countries to emulate. And for countries that have already stepped out and done some tremendous work in this arena, if they have a good set of laws and they have good enforcement, then that'll be a prime candidate to have a reciprocal arrangement with the U.S.
One more question on stablecoins. You touched on this in the beginning. We talked about offshore, but can you go in a little deeper on the illicit finance concerns? We talk about this a lot in this space, and whether you feel that the legislation does enough, if you think there's going to have to be follow-on, depending on what the final passage looks like.
I've really been benefited in my service. I served in the last Congress on Foreign Affairs and the Intelligence Committee, and in this Congress, I serve on Financial Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee. So, over the past 3 years, I think I've had a pretty intimate look at concerns around illicit finance out on a blockchain using digital assets, compared with trade-based money laundering, cash, shell company ownership of real property versus just plain old check and wire and money fraud. I mean, illicit finance is in every bit of that, and including the Hawala network and just plain cash. So this is transnational crime knows no bounds on this. But in a blockchain, and we've taken testimony on this really 4 or 5 years, going back to Mrs. Waters' chairmanship. We have testimony from the Treasury, testimony from the retired FBI, testimony from Chain Analysis, testimony from a variety of people in the national security space that, agree that tracking someone on a blockchain is a lot easier to interdict and block an illicit finance activity than it is if they're doing it in cash or trade-based money laundering or many, many other ways. So I'm not going to argue that it's worse. When I read in newspapers and see in the press that, so-and-so illicit actor used crypto. Okay, well, you could take out the word crypto and add in cash or a million other things. And we're all working to interdict that. And we have special units of people in buildings around this metropolitan area that don't do anything but attempt to interdict illicit behavior by computers, either in the cyber arena or in the illicit finance arena. And I think they're pretty dang successful at doing that, which doesn't mean it's stopped, just like I can't stop the biggest smuggling operation in the world, which is mislabeled cigarettes. But we're at it every single day. And I think our ability to interdict it, block it, track it, hack back, recover it, track somebody and hunt them down is as straightforward as it can be inside a blockchain-based system. Not that there aren't exceptions to what I just said, but you get my point. So the bills, both clarity on market structure and on stablecoin, have at their heart to have a robust AML BSA requirement for anyone who is engaged, with those activities. And we'll try to keep it that way.
So I've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to these online questions. But first, let's talk about clarity for a few minutes. Spent a lot of time on stablecoin. That was always seen as the easier of the two to get done. What do you see as the next step on clarity in the market structure bill?
Again, I just always love the conventional wisdom of Washington. People say, well, the stablecoin bill is the easiest bill to pass. Well, okay, well, then why didn't we pass it in the House? We passed market structure in 2023 with 71 Democratic votes, and we got bogged down in the details of trying to have Patrick McHenry bring stablecoins to the floor because of this internal referee between the Biden administration and the Hill on what that landing spot looked like. And in getting the framework passed with 71 votes, don't forget we had no statement of administration position opposed to the bill, the Biden administration. We believe we were fully in compliant with the theme of Joe Biden's executive order that digital assets is important, and we need rules of the road. We need to regulate spot Bitcoin. We need a market framework. We need a stablecoin bill. And so we wrote that bill, marked it, and passed it in 3.5 or 4 months in 2023. And I think we can do that again in 2025 because we've made some improvements in the Clarity Act over FIT 21. We've made it a little less clunky. It's a little bit more streamlined in how one recognizes that a token is on a decentralized, fully functioning blockchain without the imprimatur that we had in FIT 21 where the SEC had to make that decision. So that's one of the major differences between the bills. And we'll have hearings this week, tomorrow. Both the House Ag Committee and the House Financial Services Committee will meet this week on clarity, taking testimony about it. And as I say, we had a nice bipartisan group of people introduce them, and we're working on it. And we're going to, just as driving to this event, Cynthia Lummis announced today when she was on Bloomberg that the Senate will begin work on market structure next week. So we're moving.
Also optimistic on clarity.
Sorry, I hate to be optimistic. I know no one gets paid to be optimistic in Washington.
No, it's refreshing. So, okay, let me turn to a question from Leslie Chafkin, former U.S. Treasury official who's in the room sitting right here. And this is what Leslie asks. You raise foreign stablecoin issuers holding U.S. treasuries. How should the U.S. think about engaging with these issuers? It's a different paradigm than sovereign holders of U.S. treasuries. Is there anything USG should be thinking about on national security and economic security concerns?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. One of the largest, of course, has a U.S. custodian of their treasury portfolio, which is an interesting feature. But this gets into the reciprocity nature of a non-U.S. Jurisdiction with their enforcement. If they mirror up to our reporting standards, then we would have, a feel for what their holdings are of treasuries, and that would be a transparent thing. I think that's the most important issue there is transparency. These are short-term bills, though, and so one has to keep that, in mind that it could be a large number, but it would be in short-term finance, which would probably mean less hedging of it by those entities in terms of buying the futures on it. But I think transparency is the short answer to that question. Being aware of who those large holders are, where they are, and what their portfolio, how their portfolios composed.
I'm going to turn to a question here from Tim Massad, former chair of the CFTC. Says, Chairman Hill like the provision in the Genius Act that prohibits public non-financial companies from owning a stablecoin issuer? We didn't get to this difference between the bills.
That is, yeah, and we should have.
Yeah.
That's
If so, would he expand it to private companies as well?
Yeah. So this gets into the issue of separation of commerce and banking. So for those of you who are longstanding bank analysts or covering banking topics, this is not a new thing. It goes back literally to the Great Depression laws and the amendments thereto. So the issue is, can a non-bank issue a state payment stablecoin? And the answer in the House bill was yes, subject to OCC regulation of exactly the same capital and regulatory burden standards. But in the debate in 2023 in the House, we took an amendment from Ralph Norman of South Carolina on the McHenry stablecoin text that really was inserting the bank holding company law into the debate, saying that a non-bank, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, couldn't have more than, say, 24.9% of the ownership of a payment stablecoin. So it was a way to minimize the commerce and banking impact. And that's the way Congress has solved some of these problems before. That was in McHenry 2023. Our bill in 2025 that we marked up to the committee is what I call a clean bill now. It does not have that provision in it. And in the Senate debate, you're right, they had a bit of a commerce versus banking debate over there, but they landed in this spot where they said, well, publicly traded big tech companies couldn't be an issuer. Well, I think all that has to be clarified, and then somebody has, like, what does that mean? Publicly traded, I think we know the definition of that. What does big tech mean? I mean, legally. Do you want to have it skewed under sort of equal protection? I mean, do you want to have public companies penalized, but private companies don't? Could a public company create a private company? I mean, what does that mean? So I think the point is, and thank you for raising it, and thanks for Tim for bringing it up, probably a landing spot on commerce banking, inside the stablecoin of ultimate bill is another topic that needs to be worked out with the two houses.
No, I'm glad
I'm glad Tim brought it up, and I should have mentioned it in my list.
Okay, this is a fun one we got. I'm combining a few here, but basically the question is, how do you feel about public officials offering their own coins or meme coins? And how would you feel about a French Hill coin in the future?
It would be amazing. So is that a possibility? No,
tell us.
I've said publicly that this issue of, and Donald Trump Jr. has given an interview today talking about sort of their rationale for this. I'll let you go look at that. But those family investments have made the work we're doing in the House and Senate a little more complicated because it's injected politics into what we've had as a very nonpartisan, in fact, bipartisan set of goals to be innovators and support American innovation, bring capital back to the U.S., make the U.S. a leader in this fintech zone of digital assets. So it has made it more complicated because it's a distraction from that core work. In the Senate, they're considering some limitation on executive branch and legislative branch officials' name, image, and likeness used in some way. But I'm not an expert in their language, so let's see how that debate continues. And I can't think of anything I'd rather not have than a French Hill meme coin.
The market
please don't be sarcastic and go out and go on your free software and create that. Please don't.
It's probably already been created in the last couple minutes. So
thanks a lot, guys. This is the meme caucus over here.
Okay, two more questions in my remaining 2 minutes here. One is about the U.S. hosting the G20 presidency next year. What would be your message? What would you want to see Treasury focus on in that process related to these issues, related to digital assets? How can we make the most of hosting the G20 and 80% of the global economy on our agenda, really, going into 2026?
Well, I view the G20, this goes back to 40 years of my work in government, in the Senate, White House, Treasury, now in Congress. I'm not a huge G20 person, meaning I think it's a very good place to have a meeting and talk about some key issues that affect a lot of our citizens around the world in those countries. But I don't view it as a decision-making body for almost any topic I can think of. But I think understanding the digital economy and how our households, our individual families, and our citizens are using decentralized finance or tokenized payments, and how that affects their individual economies, and how we can preserve interoperability of that system, as we have done for many, many years in the existing TradFi financial system. We want to make sure that in the tokenized space, we take advantage of the open architecture of the internet, which is a good thing, which has benefited the billions of people on Earth, and that we do have interoperability, when it comes to digital assets. So I think how it's impacting our citizens, B2B, B2C, C2C. So this is a big aspect of this is peer-to-peer transactions, tokenization, and how to maintain a sense of interoperability along the large economies of the world, I think would be important. It would be a nice a general topic for discussion at a meeting like that.
Yeah, we'll try to raise that on the agenda in the G20 next year. Final question for me. What's the cost of getting this wrong? You've been optimistic in this conversation on stablecoin, on clarity, on progress, on US leadership. But if it doesn't come together, for whatever reason, this doesn't come on stablecoin, on market structure, what does that mean for the dollar, for US role and financial leadership in the global economy?
Yeah, I think getting it wrong means you have several takeaways. One, the use of blockchain and decentralized finance and tokenization of both real world assets and creating systems that can tokenize programmable payments is not going away. So you choose not to play, you'll have continued American innovation and work, mostly by big companies that have global reach to be able to do that development. And I think you hurt the true innovators in that space. So you like push it up into America global multinational corporations, because they are going to pursue it. So you reduce innovation, you reduce investment here, it reduce the number of people working here on this kind of innovation. So I think that's a bad macroeconomic decision. I think it's bad for entrepreneurship too, because you're going to see that whatever enterprise development happens would be happening up at multinational land. So it's not going to affect someone working on Onyx at JP Morgan Chase. They're just cranking away. But it will dent those people working every day. I meet with them almost every week, who have figured out a way to do something better and lower cost and more effectively, using blockchain. Those people a lot of them will move out of the country. So that's, I think, the biggest issue. And I don't think we should do that. And then you won't have the visibility of it. We'll have the biggest capital market in the world, over $100 trillion, dominated by the US capital market system. And we're going to cede that future capital market development to other companies and other folks outside the US that don't have the same rule of law. They don't have a convertible currency. They don't have a functioning 250-year-old good market economy, good democratic society. And it's going to be, it's not what we should do. And for consumers, more of the usual stuff that everybody complains about. It'll be unregulated, free for all, where I think you'll just continue to have bad actors punished and good people trying to do good things, not successful.
Thank you. It's a good note to end on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate you all so much.
I want to thank my colleagues Ananyu Kumar and Alicia Changani, who lead our future money work at the Atlantic Council. I want to invite up Tiffany Smith, partner at WilmerHale and co-chair of the Blockchain and Cryptocurrency Working Group here. Tiffany, over to you.
Thanks, Josh. And thanks to Chairman Hill for that very rich discussion. talking about the key issues with respect to stablecoins, market structure, and the broader implications. Just highlighting some of the key issues you touched on today: foreign issuers, digital dollarization, illicit finance, separation of banking and commerce, and potentially the most important, which you ended on, is really the implications of not getting this right. So as you mentioned, we're at a very important inflection point. I'm also optimistic about what's to come. So thanks again to Atlantic Council for partnering with us on this very important event. Thanks you all for being here. And I encourage you all to engage. As was just discussed, we're at a very important inflection point. If you agree with everything that was said here today, you should still engage. As Chairman Hill mentioned, Nick, who I think is somewhere in the room, and Allison Buchanan, they've been doing a wonderful job of taking in feedback on the bills from everyone, right? Good feedback is good feedback. And so they're being very thoughtful. So it's very important that everyone engages. So thanks again for coming. And I hope to see you at future events. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tiffany.